Hello, Brovs. We're back with The Witch and the Priest by Hilda Lewis, a novel based on the true story of Joan Flower, the infamous 17th century witch. We're on chapter 8, and I will butcher this as I've done the other 7. Samuel Fleming opened his eyes. She was standing there, the sunlight streaming through her body. He could see clear through her to the open window, and the summer garden beyond. You are almost as much a shadow as I, myself, she said, laughing. Nonsense, he spoke with a briskness he did not feel. I shall be myself soon. A little more of this, and I shall be well again. He held out a frail hand so that it was stained gold with sunshine. We must hope so, priest, for the struggle is hard, and whichever way it goes, it must at last come to an end. There is but one end, he said. God always wins. Say you so? And she mocked a little. Priest! And she spoke again with that strange gentleness of hers. You are frail and old, and until the battle is won, there is no peace for you. Why must you torment yourself? You know the answer. You told me yourself. Have you forgotten? I played my part in your life. I must play it now. You are dead. We are bound to each other, I think, until the end of time. Yes, it is true. True and strange. A witch and a priest bound together until the end of time. I shall be glad of your companionship, he said, and God will be glad, since he will bring it to pass. You are courteous, priest, but you are wrong. It is not your God, but my master that will rejoice. Are you ready for my tale? I am ready. Margaret had changed since the night of the Sabbath. The sullen look had gone. There was an eagerness about her, a wild, lost look, so that as we walked, others would turn away and cross themselves, and no man, though he might lust after her, dared approach. But she cared nothing for that now. She lived only for the next Sabbath. As for men, even at our espites, she would have had none of them, save that it was her duty. Had my Lord Earl himself stooped, she would not have suffered his breath upon her cheek. Once the master has taken a woman, all men are clots of dung. Her shoulder ached still where he had nipped it, but now the pain was all joy for his sake who had caused it. And when the pain was gone and nothing left but a blue crescent scar, it served to keep her memory sharp for revenge. Yet she was no true witch, as I have said before, but a hot young woman troubled by the desires of the body. Had things fallen out otherwise, any lusty man would have served her turn. For she had no firm principle of evil, and more, who has ever known a witch that did not cherish her familiar and gladly suckle it with her blood? But Meg could not abide hers. It came to her in the shape of a rat, and I have seen her shudder and shake when the thing put up its sharp snout and nuzzled her flesh. Eager, restless, that was Meg these days. The master promised me my revenge, she would say over and over again, and each time I would answer, then he will keep his promise, and once, what is the promise? I asked, trying her. She said, you know well, 2 children in place of those, but for all her eagerness she stumbled and could go no further. If you are too nice to name the matter, are you not too nice for revenge? I asked. She began again, 2 children in place of those, to be sacrificed, and she was pale as bone. And what revenge shall you take upon them? I asked. She looked at me dumb. I saw how she tried to speak, but could not speak. You shall have your revenge when you are fit. You are not fit yet, since you cannot so much as name it. You will learn that the master helps those that help themselves, and only those. Well, what revenge? She said then, very low, the death of the 2 little boys. Which little boys? I asked. You know well, and her voice came out without sound. And when still I waited, said very low, Lord Roos and Francis, his brother. Search your heart, I warned her. Even a witch may know tenderness, and they are fair children. I will have their death, she cried out. Lord Roos has lived longer than the child I bore, 5 years longer. It is 5 years too long. And the babe, I said, the little Francis, she held her white lips stiff. Him too. He has lived longer than the newborn child. And she turned her head away. Had a witch tears, she would have shed them then. She turned her face again, and it was all white and working. I will have them both. Both. Master, hear me. It was suddenly dark in the room. I could barely make out the master where he stood, wrapped about in a great cloak, black against the blackness. But I knew him in the coldness that came forth, and I heard Margaret take in her breath. He wasted no sweet word. You have kept me waiting long, and long enough, he told her. It is a thing I will not endure from any servant. Lord, forgive, she cried, all humble upon her knees, and the wind of her trembling stirred the hem of my skirts. I knew that he would never look upon her with favor again. He is not like your pale God, priest. The master hates a poor and humble spirit. A humble spirit is not poor, but rich, Samuel Fleming said. But be that as it may, the master has no use for the humble. He looked upon Margaret with dislike, but she was too foolish to understand it. Before you can work these children harm, he told her, you must possess yourself of something that is theirs. But I have nothing, Lord, nothing at all. I am forbid the castle. Is there no one to help you? He asked. At once I took his meaning. It was my other girl he desired, Philippa. Meg was a fair enough piece of white flesh, but Philip was fit to be queen of hell. And when she did not understand, but went on kneeling dolefully, he said, there is your sister. No, Margaret cried out, sharp enough now and jealous, and that is another sign that she was no true witch, for we witches grudge not the master the lightest of his desires, and though we would die joyfully to lie in the place of that woman in whom he takes delight, yet we would serve her with all our heart, wishing her no ill, since she brings joy to him we worship. No, she cried out again, my sister is too young. Your sister is old as evil, he said, and that's as old as time. He turned his back on Meg and thrust his dark face towards me. Woman, he said, bring me your daughter. Lord, I said, I serve, but that girl is hard of heart. Her will is iron. I will soften both. He turned again to Margaret, where she knelt, head upon her knees. I could see the fall of her fair hair in the darkness. When your sister comes freely to my service, you shall have your revenge, he said, and so was gone. And the darkness and the cold went with him, and the room was bright again and warm. And now I could get no sense at all out of Meg. Wild and jealous, she could do nothing but tremble and rail. Could she have wept, she might have eased her heart. But all turned inward to bitterness, and this bitterness turned outward again, and was writ upon her face. I sent a message to Philip up at the castle. I was sick, I said, and she must come at once. It was Barry of Langhorne took it. He was not willing. He had heard the tales about us, and indeed it was remembered against him at his own trial. I whistled up Rudderkin to follow him every step of the way. Rudderkin with his long, loping tread. It was the familiar that helped to betray us, though the fault was not his. But there were those that swore they saw the white cat change into a man leper white, even to the hair, except where he was bedaubed with blood and his red eyes. That was a lie, priest. Rudderkin never took human shape. Nor when he went about my business was there any blood upon him, for I did not let him suck upon me until the work was done, save twice, and never at this time. But tales go about poor witches, and some of them are true, and some of them are half true, but most of them are lies, and for half-truths and for lies we suffer more than for the truth, and many innocents also that never worked the spell along with us. You must bear those deaths upon your conscience, which, but for you and your like, they had never been condemned. It is your conscience, priest, since you sat in judgment. It is for the judges to find the truth. But this much was true. The little lady Catherine spied him and cried aloud at the pretty thing, and would have taken him in her arms. But he reared himself and leaped, and would have had her blood had she not fled screaming. Philip did not trouble herself to come down that day, although she believed me sick, and all night long Meg lay weeping and wailing, until I feared the master would put an end to her and her lamenting. The next day brought Philip all smiles, heartless, a child who had done no wickedness as yet, but with evil all about her. Margaret got up and went away. My sister is jealous, Philip said, and twirled upon her toes. And yet she is fair, and I am brown, and she is plump as a pigeon, and I skinny as a rat. And she is comely, and I am plain, but she has lost her man, and mine I keep to the end of days. Or, and she twirled again, until I tire of him. That one, I said, that lout, that clumsy fool. My girl, if you must have a sweetheart, I can find you a better. What better, she asked, and stopped twirling. What better than Tom Simpson with his good lands and his snug house? Perhaps you will give me to Sir George Manners, or maybe to my Lord Earl himself. Why not? It is easy enough to be rid of my lady, and I am just the one to take her place, she said, very wry. Her work-soiled hands went up to her skinny breasts. The smile was crooked on her mouth. You hold yourself too cheap. You may be greater than my lady, I told her. Greater than any lady in the land, be it the queen herself. She stopped twirling and came close, peering at me out of her narrow eyes. I have a sweetheart for you, I said, that will make you the envy of the world. If you would be queen of the world, you would have to say so. Queen of the world, she laughed. Oh, my poor mother. Certainly it is the madhouse and the whip for you. Leave me out of this, I said. Look into your heart. Are you set upon Tom Simpson? When I could be queen of the world, she mocked, but since that is the thing I cannot be, why then I will take Tom. I know well how to keep him faithful, which I could not do with the king. And she laughed again. Oh, she cried suddenly, I am weary of my life at the castle. My lady is turned against me. She says nothing, but I know it, and everyone knows it. There is not one who does not murmur behind my back. Oh, sometimes it is not behind my back. Even the littlest, dirtiest scullion looks at me with lewd eyes and thinks his dirty thoughts. What better could I do than marry Tom? And will you marry the goody, too? The goody? I can deal with her, she said, her eyes hard as stone. Girl, what is this talk of betting with a plowboy? Or, and I chose my words with care, setting yourself against that old witch, his mother. Witch? She took me up at once. That is a word they use up at the castle, but it isn't of Goody Simpson they use it. Of me. She nodded. Then they shall have good cause. It is time. It has long been time. Now listen. You must lay hands upon something that belongs to the little lord. Some small thing that will not be missed. A scarf, or a kerchief, or a lock of his hair. Anything. Anything at all, so long as it is his. Why, she asked sharp. She was no soft, stupid thing like Meg. What is this talk of my little lord? We speak not of him, but of a sweetheart. Are you going to catch him for me? 5 years, it's over, young. And she laughed. Only a fool laughs too soon, I told her. One thing hangs upon the other. You must wait for your sweetheart till the work is done. Not I, she said, very quick. I have my sweetheart where I want him. She turned her thumb downward and pressed it upon the table. As for the work, you have not told me what it is. To return evil for evil, I said, to pay them well for your sister's disgrace. She shrugged. Meg is a fool. She deserves all she gets. We cannot be wise all the times, I said, and who knows when your own turn will come. I can look to myself, she said. We were silent while I cast about for another way of coming at her. You have never seen the casting of his spell, I said at last. It is a fine sight. Her eyes began to gleam within their narrow lids. I plan to bewitch Lord Roos to his death, I said. It is a spell that will take time to work. Before it is finished, you shall see some rare fun. Yes, she said yes, and her lips smiled. Suddenly she said very sharp, the little lord is a pleasant child. Why should I return Meg's evil upon this child I like? Leave Meg out of it, I said smooth. You have your own slights to revenge, and may have more. Why should my lady grow cold towards you? Why should they slander you behind your back and to your very face? What ill have you done anyone as yet? That is a point, she said, and I must think upon it. As for this sweetheart you talk about, this sweetheart that is the envy of the world, he might well take some holding. She laughed. Still, she did not believe me, but Tom is an honest fool that I can twist about my finger. It was no use speaking more of the matter so she returned to the castle, and she had promised nothing. It was not long before she was home again. I was alone when she came in, her face all blotched with rage and her eyes bitter beneath slitted lids. She said nothing, but from her bosom she brought out a glove, a child's glove, and threw it across the table. Joan Flower heard the old man groan where he lay white upon the pillow. You may well groan, she said, for now the story quickens. It needed no witchcraft to guess that Tom Simpson had been weighing matters. The fool was not such a fool after all. The scandal that had blackened Meg was now rising against Philip. Two sisters, birds of one feather. His mother, no doubt, had helped his dull wits to the end. He had loved my girl, in a way the way the rabbit loves the weasel. Now he was finished with her. There would be no snug farm for her now, no, nor any other betrothal in the Vale of Belvoir. This, Philip's mouth worked as though she worried the little glove between her teeth. Yes, and all you ask, sweetheart, or none. And she looked at me out of the corner of her eye. Certainly there is one, I said, and he is a prince. Nay, he is a king. You talk in riddles, she said, impatient, and looked about the room. Where shall I find me a prince, let alone a king, in this place? I will show you, I said. I drew the bolt across the door and hung a cloth upon the window, and in the darkness I had made, I saw her wondering eyes gleam like a rat's. I spoke no word, but with my finger drew a circle about us in the dust of the floor. I pricked my arm and let the blood flow within the circle, and in the blood I wrote the name. I stood then, eyes closed, hands across my breast, and whispered the words I must not tell. Then I stepped outside the circle and looked to see that she, to the last hair, was safe within. Safe? That is a strange word, surely. Did you fear so loving a master? Not more than you fear your God, yet it was not fear for myself. I was his obedient servant. But Philip, there was another matter. She had a mind not to be moved and a pride to match it. And if she angered the master, he might tear her in pieces. But not while she stood within the circle. There she was safe. It was the first and only time I set my will against him. Then I went round and about the circle widdershins, and all the time I cried softly, Sathan, Sathan, hail, Lord, Sathan, come. Is that how you spell Satan or something? With a H in it? I could see Philip's face green where the blood had ebbed. Beneath the tan, I felt her shiver before anything happened. She was a harp whose strings the light breath stirs. In the darkness the door swung open for all it was bolted, and the coldness came in, and cold in the heart of the cold, the master. I fell upon my knees, but within the circle Philip stood upright. I raised my head at her at last, and save for the cold that streamed from him, it was hard to believe this was the master, for he stood there smiling, a pretty boy in green, and his voice was gentle too when he spoke to her. Will you become my servant to do my commands? He asked her. You are over young to take a woman's will, she said quickly. He bent his head towards her then. His eyes were old as time, and in them all the wickedness since time began. She dropped on her knees within the circle. Lord, I will be your servant, she said, and held out her arm that he might take her blood. Come forth then from the circle, he commanded. So she came from the circle, and he bent and wounded her arm, not with a knife or with his hand, but he nipped her with his teeth, which is a thing I had never heard before. When the blood streamed out over her thin brown arm, he brought out the covenant, and she made her mark. Then he said, If you have a prayer, I will grant it. And still upon her knees she answered straight, Lord, you are comely above all men, but still it is in the fashion of men. And if my Lord stoops to his servant, then let it not be in the fashion of a man, but in the fashion of the God. He asked, Do you know what it is you ask? And she, Yes, Lord. At the castle there is a picture. A woman holds a swan to her breast. He is her lover, that is well seen, and he is a god, that too is well seen. And the woman desires the strange mating. So it is with me. I have heard that the master is tall as a tree, and black as night, or that he is a great ram or a goat or a bull. Lord, if I find favor in your sight, let me know I am beloved of the God. I hope you are of the same mind when we meet again, he said. But if I come to you in the likeness of the gods, shall you not be afraid? I've not feared for my soul, she said. Why should I fear for my body? Then he let us drink to our next meeting, he said, and I brought out the wine she had taken from the castle, and they drank together. Then he set down the cup and turned to me, and there was no kindness in him. Never again set your will against me, he said. This one time I forgive you, since this girl was stiff with pride. It would have been 1,000 pities to tear such sweet flesh to pieces. And so he was gone. Philip stood very still, smiling beneath half-closed eyes, while I took the cloth from the window, and the daylight came in again. She took a fretful head, as though it disturbed her after the secret darkness. I offered her some food, for she had eaten nothing since she came, but she shook her head, and turned on her heel and went back to the castle. I rubbed out the circle and opened the window and called for Meg. She would not come at first, such was her sullen way, and when she came at last, she was wearing her spiteful look. I lifted the little glove from the table, and I remember how I stroked it with my fingertip. It was so fine and soft and worked with gay, bright silks. Pardon, I was sorry so fine a thing must be destroyed. When Samuel Fleming spoke, she started, for she was back again in the past, she, for whom all earthly things were past, back again in her little room, a child's glove upon her palm, and Margaret staring from her to the glove with untrusting eyes. You grieved, he said, for the bright, soft thing you must destroy, but of the other thing, the bright, soft thing, the thing without price you were about to destroy, you did not think. Yes, she said, I thought, and I was glad. Like you, priest, I served my master. The child's glove, Margaret said. So it was my sister that left just now. I nodded. When my sister is here, she cried out, and beat her hands together. Then the window is hooded, the door is barred. Would you have the whole world spy upon us, I asked. Come now, set a pan upon the fire, and leave fretting at the glove. We need it to work the spell. I mended the fire, and she set the pan upon it. When the water boiled, we let out our blood, and we cast it into the water together with the glove. And as we stirred together, I said the words, Glove shall go to earth below, from out this pot there to rot. Little Lord, hear the word, brew thicken, lordling sicken, peak and die in churchyard lie. I took the glove from the brew, and with a skewer I pricked it full of holes, and I called upon my familiar, Go upwards, upwards, and he flew up the chimney. I knew then that the master had hallowed the spell. So I took the glove all sodden and ruined and stained, and I digged a little hole, and I put the glove into its little grave. Woman, Samuel Fleming groaned from the bed, such wickedness, were you not afraid? Priest, that is the thing you must stop asking, for each time I must answer, Are you afraid when you go about your master's business? Your soul is firmly lodged with the devil, he said. How may I pry it loose for God? But the end is not yet, and I shall win. And that is the end of chapter 8. It's a pretty good book, honestly. Although some of the wording is a bit clunky. There's Ratakin and his red eyes again and again, peering into your soul. Goodbye, bruv.